it's Mo. I'm starting like 3 vlogs today. And one of the vlogs is that I have found 3 of the books on my 20 books I found out about in 2020 that I wanted to read in 2021 list. So every year, everyone on Booktube does a 20 books for 2020 or a 21 books for 2021, or they're probably going to start doing a 14 books for 2024, etc., etc. So a list of books that they're highly anticipating that they want to read, whether those are books off their own shelves, whether those are new releases, whether those are backlist books, whether they are books that they just have never gotten around to but they really want to read. And I do a slightly different take on that, where I do 23 books that I found out about in 2023, but I really want to read in 2024. Because I don't buy new books, when I hear about a book on Booktube, I usually put it on my want to read list in Goodreads, or I mark it down somewhere, or I just file it away in my brain. And I know that I want to get to that book eventually, but I also know that the odds of me finding that book right away when I want to read it are fairly slim. Not that it hasn't happened, because I absolutely have found out about a book and then the next day or the next week I have found that book in a little free library or at a used book sale. Generally, the books that I want to read, I have to really keep my eye out for. And that has been the case the entire time on my channel. So going into the year 2021, I made a book of 20 books that I had found out about the previous year that I really, really wanted to read in 2021. There were 20 books on that list, and I've read the majority of them. I will list all the playlists with all that stuff down below, and I'm not going to go through all the books that I've read for that already, but 3 books that I haven't read for that I found recently are Felix Ever After by Case and Calendar. I found this book on a free audio site. I also found Darius the Great Is Not Okay by Adib Khorram, which was also on the list. This is also a YA. Are we seeing a theme? I have actually had The Bone Houses by Emily Lloyd Jones for a long time, since 2021, but I just have never gotten the option to read it or worked up the courage to read it, because again, it is another YA. So not only am I reading 3 books, I'm also reading 3 YA books in this vlog, so it might take me a little while. I thought now was the perfect time to do this vlog, partly because I just found 2 of the books, and partly because it is the Trans Girl Readathon put on by Say Kevi and Willow at the channel Books and Bow, and the group read for this month-long trans-centric readathon is Felix Ever After. That is the book that I started with. So far, I am enjoying it, although it is YA heavy, so I am taking my time with it. It follows Felix, who is a 16, 17-year-old living in New York. Felix lives with his dad, and unfortunately Felix's mother left them quite a while ago, before Felix even came out as trans. Felix's dad has done the best for him, and he has sent him to an art school. Felix has decided that's really what he wants to do with his life, and he was happy to move to that school anyway, because it was after his transition, after his top surgery, and he's able to live the life that he wants to lead there, even though he doesn't have that many friends, and even though he's not like popular in his new school, just like he wasn't in his old school. Felix and his best friend do teenage stuff. They drink, they smoke pot, they skip class, they struggle with their assignments. One of the friends that they were close to the year before has kind of turned against them, and Felix doesn't know why. Felix is also really struggling making his portfolio. He really wants to go to Brown. He is kind of putting off the work because he's worried about what he should do for his portfolio to go to this prestigious school. Someone finds old photos on Felix's phone of the way he looked previously and of his dead name, and they spread them all out like a gallery in the school. Felix is really upset. He has no idea who could have done this, who could have hacked his phone. He is really suspicious of their friend who they had a falling out with. Where I am in the story now, Felix has decided to exact revenge by finding out a secret about this friend, setting up a fake Instagram account, getting to know them online, and then spilling their secrets just the way Felix's secrets were spilled. So that's where I am right now. And like I said, I really like it. I love the details about New York and Brooklyn. I know kids who went to, you know, those art schools in Brooklyn and everything. So I feel like I can really imagine and evoke what's going on in my mind. I like that Felix is a very typical teenager in a lot of ways, that they are overconfident in some ways, that they are underconfident in some ways, you know, that they have all these insecurities, but they also feel like they couldn't get into trouble or nothing bad would happen to them. And I think it's an interesting discussion that's happening, that although Felix is trans and although he struggles with his father not fully accepting him, he struggles with his mother abandoning him, he feels lucky that he hasn't had to deal with worse things, and that the worst thing that he's had to deal with so far is someone outing him and dead naming him, even though his school knew that he was trans and the people there knew. But being confronted with someone's hatred is what he's really dealing with. Obviously, it's a YA book. I kind of can feel how this is going. I'm only 35% of the way in, and I feel like this book could end in another 10%, you know? I think if I listen to another hour of it, we could wrap this story up, but there's another 5 hours of the audiobook, so it's going to be a long haul. That part I'm not really enjoying as much, and definitely I'm having to suspend my reader experience to enjoy a YA book. And it doesn't really bode well for the other YAs that I'm going to be reading in this vlog, but we will see. If you've already read Felix Ever After, let me know what you thought of it, and when I read some more, I'll let you know. I've started the next book for this vlog, which is Darius the Great Is Not Okay. I don't think I ever talked about the end of Felix Ever After. I did finish Felix Ever After more than a month ago now, and I did really enjoy it. I think it's a book that should be read, can be read by adults and children. I didn't know where it was going. I guessed one thing and then it turned out it was something else, so I was happy that even though it was a young adult book, I didn't guess where it was going. I didn't know where it was going. I knew where it was going, but I didn't guess who the perpetrator of the issue was. I thought it was a really good portrayal of just teenage angst and teenage coming of age, navigating love and life, navigating friendship, making new friends, just even down to like having to do work, going to college, even down to having to meet friends, relatives, and be polite, the relationship that teenagers have with their parents, which can be extremely complicated and is extremely complicated for Felix. I did struggle with the whole YA of it, and I think that's something that's going to come up through this entire vlog because I don't usually read YA and I'm not super interested in YA. And part of the whole idea of this vlog, part of the reason that I hadn't gotten to them yet was because they're YA books. That first year, 2020, when I was on Booktube, I found out about so many books that I wanted to read, and I found out about so many interesting sounding YA books. But that was before I really realized that I'm not much of a YA reader. I think from 2020 to now, 2023, my reading has evolved a ton, but I also think that some things that I never gravitated towards, like YA, I didn't gravitate towards because I don't particularly like them. They're not for me either. Like, I'm an adult. They're not for me. They're for young adults, and I'm an adult. You know, that doesn't mean that a YA book can't be good for an adult. That doesn't mean that an adult can't read and appreciate a YA book, and I definitely read and appreciated Felix, and I understand that Felix Ever After is in a completely unique place where it is being almost perceived as an adult book because it's being banned by so many people and in so many places, and it's acting like it is not for young adults, for teenagers. I do think it's for older young adult readers, so I wouldn't give this book necessarily to a 10, 11-year-old, but I would give it to a 13, 14-year-old. I think the talk and discussion of sex and drugs in this could cause trepidation for certain parents who maybe haven't talked to their kids too much about that, but like, kids need to know all that stuff. So I think that those are good topics for children to learn too, and if they're not going to learn it in schools and they're not going to learn it from their parents, then books are a great way that they can learn it. So Felix Ever After does contain motifs and themes of those things, as well as themes and motifs of gender identity and of finding yourself and of sexuality and of learning your sexuality and your gender identity as a young person. So I think all of those things are totally amazing. I've said it before, I wish that I had this book when I was younger, not because I struggled with my sexuality or my gender identity, but because I must have known people who did, and maybe just reading this book would have helped me as a younger person understand what they were going through more, and just because I would have loved to see more diversity in the reading that I did when I was a young person. I would have loved to have seen two best friends hanging out in Brooklyn. I would have loved to have seen the gender discussions that are in this book as a teenager. That just would have been great for me, even though I didn't necessarily like need this book. But I think everybody does need this book in a way. I do think this is a great insight into just young people in general. Moving on to Darius the Great is Not Okay. I'm about halfway through, a little less than halfway through. I'm on page 146, and Darius the Great is Not Okay is about Darius. He is an Iranian American living on the West Coast somewhere, maybe Seattle, maybe Washington, maybe Portland, I'm not quite sure. He is struggling with being a teenager, as most teenagers do. So he's getting a little bit bullied in school. He's finding out about interests that he has outside of school, but he's not necessarily able to pursue them. He loves tea, but he's not able to get a job at the tea house that he really wants to get a job at. So he's working at a tea shop in the mall that he kind of thinks doesn't really make tea the right way, but he's learning what he can there so he can take that and have it on his resume when he can apply to his favorite tea shop. He's struggling with his relationship with his father. Both he and his father struggle with depression and take medicine for it, and that's something that they share in common and something that they share common ground on. But Darius's father is a very confident, secure man and doesn't really understand Darius and all the things that Darius likes and thinks and wants to learn about. He doesn't understand why Darius is allowing himself to be bullied. He doesn't understand why Darius is gaining so much weight, even though that really has to do with the medication that Darius takes for his depression. He has a lot of expectations for Darius, and Darius feels like he's always falling short. Darius's mom and he get along, and Darius and his sister get along, but Darius feels that his mother and father both have a closer relationship with his sister. So his younger sister can speak Farsi and Darius can't. His younger sister gets along with their dad and does all the things like athletics and is brave the way Darius thinks that his father wants him to be. Darius's grandparents are still living in Iran, and Darius's grandfather has cancer. Darius's mother decides that the family is going to take a family trip to Iran to visit her mother and father. That's kind of where this book all takes off. So Darius is now in Iran, and he is struggling with the idea that he doesn't fit in there just the way he doesn't feel like he fits in back in the US either. He can't speak Farsi, so when people are speaking Farsi around the table, he feels left out. And although this should make him and his father join together because they're both in that situation, it's pushing them further apart. Darius does make a friend in Iran. He has to explain a lot of things like why he doesn't speak Farsi, both to his friends and his grandparents. He has to explain why he takes medication for his depression. Underneath all of this, there's definitely an underlying feeling that Darius is probably queer as well, and this is one of the things that Darius feels a little bit inferior, especially to do with his father about. Although that hasn't been explicitly stated, there's been kind of a edging around of that. And so I wonder if in the end of the book it's going to be more about that as well, and his kind of coming out. This book is for much younger YA readers than Felix Ever After. This does not speak about gender identity yet, or drugs or alcohol or sex yet. And it just feels like a much younger, more gentle way to talk about the issues that Darius is having. But what I like about this is that it's very plain. They don't use like weird language for things. Like there is a point where Darius is in a gym shower with people and he's feeling really embarrassed, and then they make fun of him and they talk about like his penis, and it's just like talked about. It's not weird like language about it or whatever. Darius just speaks about it. And the same is true about his depression, and the same is true about his weight. So everything is very easy to understand. There's nothing that really has to be puzzled out for younger readers, which I think is good. Darius is a Star Trek fan, and I am also a Star Trek fan, so he makes a lot of references to Star Trek The Next Generation, and he's definitely really nerdy about Star Trek, really nerdy about tea, and I think that's very identifiable. Just being nerdy about things that you love. Darius is such a tea nerd. He loves tea so much. He knows the best temperatures to steep different teas at. He knows the best way to prepare it. But when he gets to Iran, his grandfather assumes he doesn't know how to make tea. And Darius is both too polite and too embarrassed to correct his grandfather. And I feel like that's like a very young person thing that could happen in your life. And getting teased and getting bullied is a very common thing that happens to many young people, especially people who have different sizes or shapes or gender identities or sexualities than the majority of people around them. His complex relationship with his father and mother is really good and interesting, and again, stated in a very simple, plain way that would be easy for young people to understand, easily identifiable, and easy to empathize and sympathize with. It's not necessarily a book for me, but it has a lot less of the angsty teen than Felix Ever After, so I feel like that's the part that I really don't get on board with. The drama, the angsty teen, the know-it-all teen, which are all things that teens are, but they're not things that I particularly enjoy to read. Whereas this, I can identify with more, and therefore, like, is easier for me to read. It doesn't have as much, like, high drama. It doesn't have as much that know-it-all, like, I know exactly what I'm doing. Like, Darius even questions a lot. He'll make a statement, like, everybody feels this way, and then he'll be like, right? There's a lot of like questioning and growing and learning that's happening, or hopefully going to happen in this book. That is where I'm at with Darius the Great, and when I read some more, I'll let you know. I have finished Darius the Great Is Not Okay by Adib Khorram. I finished it this morning. I read the last 70 pages this morning, and I cried the entire last 70 pages. I ended up really, really loving this one. I think it is a very gentle, soft YA, and in such a contrast to Felix Ever After in so many ways. It deals with teenagers of the same age, but in such different places in their life. Felix is really on his own in a lot of respects, and likes that, and takes that kind of teenage, I know everything approach to things. And Darius is almost the opposite, where he can do things on his own. He goes to work on his own. He goes to school on his own, but he wishes that he could still be more childlike and still have the childlike aspects of his life that he had only a few years ago. So he still wishes his dad would tell him stories at night. He still wishes that he could be the only child in some respect. Whereas Felix Ever After is very heavily queer, and the characters are out, and the characters are proud, and it's queerness and transness is discussed extremely openly. The queer aspects of this book are very, very subtle. It's never explicitly stated or talked about, but the signs and pointers are there, and it does have a bearing on Darius's connection with everyone, with a new friend that he meets, with his father, with his grandparents. I think also Felix is so much wrapped up in the current times and so much about being a teenager in New York, having to be tough, having to know how to navigate the world like that, being in a cutthroat kind of area where you need to get into the right college or you feel that pressure. Whereas Darius have goals and things that he's trying to achieve, but they're talked about in such a gentle way. He really wants to work at his favorite tea shop, but they don't take kids under 18, so he has to wait to be able to work there. It's very gentle. Everything is talked about in a very gentle way. Even Darius's depression, which is a huge part of this book, is talked about in such a way that Darius is told by his therapist, by his family, that his depression is not his fault. And even though his depression doesn't make sense, he doesn't need to have a huge sad thing happen to him or have terrible things in his life or have abuses for his depression to be relevant. That his depression is about his brain chemistry, and it is about the person that he is, and it is something that he's going to have to navigate forever. The acceptance of that is there, and the discussion of that is there. That crying is okay and showing emotions is okay. It's never something to be ashamed of. One of the things that was most impactful for me was the depiction of Darius's depression and how, even though he's taking meds for it, even though nothing really horrible has happened, he gets into these thought spirals and these intrusive thoughts. He can't stop himself, even though logically he knows that it's not the best way to go about it, spiraling and being depressed and overthinking things and questioning his own thoughts and questioning his own mind. And I think it was just a really interesting and realistic thing to read for such a gentle YA book and for such a younger YA book. I can't help but compare it to Felix, where it's very sexual and things are very sexualized, but I don't think that like the word penis was ever used in that. Whereas here there are aspects of mild sexuality, but not much. It's more like biological. It's more about your body. Even when Darius gets teased about his body, it's not necessarily in like a sexual manner, but it's talked about very openly and very plainly. I'm a sucker for any story where parents are proud and accepting of their queer children, whatever kind of queer that happens to fall under. And this definitely got me. Darius's relationship with his dad is heartbreaking, but also very realistic, but also very sweet. Darius thinking that his dad is very disappointed in him is hard to read. When that's finally confronted in the story, it was just very sad and sweet and endearing. The friendships also felt very real in this, like the relationship that you might have with your sister, that you might be protective and happy to have a younger sister, but also jealous of the way that your parents interact with her. I just really, really like this one. I didn't expect to, and even when I first started talking to you a quarter of the way through, I wasn't sure I was going to love it, but I ended up really, really loving it. And I do want to read the second in the series. I wonder if that, because Darius is older, because more things have happened into his life, because things are more clear about his sexuality, if it will read a little bit older and maybe be more for older YA readers. This was on my 20 books I found out about in 2020, and I wanted to read in 2021. And then by last year, I kind of decided that I didn't want to read this. If I didn't find it, I wasn't gonna seek it out by any means, but I'm so glad that I did, and I'm happy that I got to it even if it was 2-3 years later. So I don't know when I'll pick up the next book for this blog, but when I do, I will let you know. In the beginning of this video, I said I was going to read The Bone Houses by Emily Lloyd Jones, and I was intending to, but just recently I found another book on my 20 books I found out about in 2020 list that I wanted to read in 2021 on audio, and that is The Coldest Girl in Cold Town by Holly Black. So this was another one off that list that last year when I looked at this list, I was like, I don't have to read this. Actually, 2 years ago when I looked at this list, I was like, I don't really need to read this book. It is a YA book. I think it is about vampires. And I found out that it's like almost 500 pages. So I was like, I don't really need to read a 500-page YA book that I'm probably not really going to enjoy. That being said, I have found a YA book that I really, really did enjoy in this video. So I decided that I want to read The Coldest Girl in Cold Town and The Bone Houses together in a separate vlog. So the conclusion of this vlog is going to be that I read Darius the Great is Not Okay, and I really, really enjoyed it. I read Felix Ever After, and I enjoyed that one as well, but it didn't speak to me quite as much as Darius did. I do think that these are both great and important YA reads that would be good for anyone, YA, adult, new adult, older readers to read. So I definitely highly recommend that if you haven't picked these up and you're interested in any of the topics in them, if you have a young person in your life that you pre-read things for, I would suggest both of these to see which one or both you might give to them, gift to them, read to them, etc. That's going to be the end of this 20 books I found out about in 2020 and I wanted to read in 2021 catching up vlog. I read 2 YA books that I really enjoyed, and now we have another chance to read a few YA books in another vlog. Let me know if you've read Felix Ever After or Darius the Great is Not Okay. Let me know what you thought of them. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.